Welcome to today's lesson. Today we are going to continue expanding double brackets. If we have a look at the first question, this question is very similar to last lesson, except that we now have a negative sign in one of the brackets. This means we're going to continue using our regular method, which is the grid method, but we just need to be able to make sure that when we multiply this negative number, we don't make any mistakes with our signs. So again, we start off by drawing the grid method. A plus 3 are the terms in the first bracket, so these terms will go down the left-hand side of our grid method. So we have A and plus 3. Again, it's really important that we remember to include the symbol because that's going to make a difference later on. Our second bracket has the terms A and minus 2, so they will go across the top row. Once we've filled in the outside of our grid method, we now need to multiply the terms together. A times A is A squared. A times minus 2 is next. First, we'll look at the symbols. I have one negative in this calculation, so there will be one negative after I multiply the terms together. 2 is the only number in this multiplication, so 2 will come next. And A is the only variable in this multiplication, so A will come next. So A times minus 2 is minus 2A. Next is positive 3 times A. This will give us a positive value. 3 is the only number, and A is the only variable. And finally, it's positive 3 times minus 2. Again, a common mistake at this point is to just do 3 take away 2 and write in 1. But for the grid method, we are multiplying. So, a positive times a negative number, well, there's one negative altogether in the calculation, so there will be one negative in the answer. And then we just multiply the numbers together. 3 times 2 is 6. So positive 3 times minus 2 is minus 6. Once we've multiplied the terms together to get our four answers, then we just need to write all four terms down in a single line. This gives us A squared minus 2A plus 3A minus 6. This is the expand part of the question complete. Now we are just trying to simplify the expression if we can. We are looking for like terms, and we can see that minus 2A and plus 3A are like terms. Now, in order to simplify minus 2A plus 3A, we could use counters in order to figure out what minus 2 add 3 is going to be equal to. But what we can also do here is we're trying to see how to make this easier, because minus 2 add 3, some people get wrong. If I chose to write those terms in a different order, so A squared, then plus 3A, minus 2A, and minus 6, then we would have this line, and hopefully plus 3A minus 2A is a bit more obvious what that value should be. 3 take away 2 is just positive 1, so plus 3A take away 2A ends up being positive 1A. We don't write the 1, so we have just positive A. The other two terms drop down, so we get A squared plus A minus 6, and that is the overall final answer to the question, because none of the remaining terms are like terms, so they will not simplify any further. On to question 2. And this question is very similar to the last question, but now we have two negative terms across the whole question. We start off just like last time with the grid method. Down the left hand side we're going to have A and then minus 5. And across the top row, we're going to have a and minus 6. Now we multiply our terms together. So a times a is a squared. A times minus 6, there's one negative in the question, so one negative in the answer. 6 is the only number, and a is the only variable. So a times minus 6 is minus 6a. Likewise, minus 5 times a is going to give us minus 5a. And finally, minus 5 times minus 6. Again, we look to see how many negative signs are in the question. There's 2 negative signs here. Those 2 negative signs, when written next to each other, become a positive sign. So minus 5 times minus 6 will give us a positive value. Now we just multiply the numbers together. So 5 times 6 is 30. So minus 5 times minus 6 is positive 30. Once we've got all 4 parts of the answer, we need to write them down in a line. To save us some effort from the last question, instead of having to write it out twice, I might want to think, is there a certain way I want to write out these 4 terms? Because both of these terms are negative, the order of writing them isn't really going to make too much of a difference, so we'll just write the 4 terms out. A squared minus 6a minus 5a plus 30. Now we look for like terms. A squared is not a like term with minus 6a minus 5a or plus 30, so that term is going to stay the same and drop down. Minus 6a is a like term with minus 5a because they have the same variable with the same power. Plus 30 is just a number by itself. It doesn't have a variable, so it won't be a like term with any of the other terms. So now we simplify minus 6a minus 5a. If I draw counters, I would have minus 6 counters and I would have minus 5 counters as well. None of these counters are going to cancel each other out because there's no positive counters to cancel out the negative counters. So altogether I count up how many counters I've got. I have 11 counters and they are negative counters, so we get minus 11 lots of a. The other 2 terms drop down, so the overall answer for this question is a squared minus 11a plus 30. On to question 3 now. This question will be slightly more difficult as we now have numbers in front of a as the first terms of each bracket. This doesn't change our expanding method at all, it just means our multiplying will be slightly more difficult when we get to it, but hopefully we'll be well prepared for that by now. Again, we draw out our grid method, 2a and minus 3 down the left hand side, and across the top 4a plus 5. And now we multiply our terms together. 2a times 4a, we'll multiply the numbers first, so 2 times 4 is 8. And now we multiply the variables. A times a is a squared. 2a times positive 5 will give us a positive value. 2 times 5 is 10, and a is the only variable. Minus 3 times 4a, there's one negative in the calculation, so one negative in the answer. 3 times 4 is 12, and a is the only variable. And minus 3 times positive 5, there's one negative in the question, so one negative in the answer, and 3 times 5 is 15. Here, because I do have a positive a term and a negative a term, I do want to consider which way round I think it will be easier to write those terms. I reckon it will be easier to have the positive number first and then the negative value afterwards. So I'll start with 8a squared and then write plus 10a minus 12a minus 15. Now we look for our like terms. Again, it's these two terms here. We have positive 10a take away 12a. Here again, if I was unsure, I would write out a method in order to do plus 10 take away 12. Because I'm doing a smaller number take away a larger number, my value will end up in the negatives. 10 take away 12 is minus 2. That should be minus 2a because we're dealing with terms of a. The other two terms that we've not used drop down. So the final answer for this question is 8a squared minus 2a minus 15. And on to today's final question. Again, we start off by drawing our grid, 3a minus 1 on the left, and 6a minus 4 across the top. 3a times 6a, 3 times 6 is 18, a times a is a squared. 3a times minus 4 will give us a negative answer. 3 times 4 is 12, and a is the only variable. Minus 1 times 6a, there's one negative in the calculation, so 1 in the answer. 1 times 6 is 6, and again a is the only variable. And finally, minus 1 times minus 4, there's two negatives in the calculation, so it will be a positive sign in the answer. And 1 times 4 is 4. We write out the four terms next to each other, so 18a squared minus 12a minus 6a plus 4. We look for our like terms, which are minus 12a and minus 6a. Minus 12 take away 6 will give us minus 18a. The other two terms drop down. So the final answer for this question is 18a squared minus 18a plus 4. And that concludes today's lesson on expanding.